let me go first because Ramogi can, I actually feed him a little bit.
Okay.
My numbers.
So we'll go.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce topic for 5 minutes, then we'll go down for maybe a quarter. All right.
Good afternoon. Thank you for everybody coming out. Welcome to Pay for Play, NCAA Athletics as Opportunity or Exploitation. My name is Rob Wyatt, and I'm president of the West Virginia University College Sports and Entertainment Law Society. This program is presented by the Sports and Entertainment Law Society. It is one of two events we'll be doing. This is our sports symposium. We will also be doing an entertainment symposium on April 12th in conjunction with Drexel University and Professor Cummings' Hip Hop in the Constitution class. It will be simulcast in room 158, and there will also be members of the Sports and Entertainment Law Society that will be traveling to Drexel for the symposium. It will feature Chuck D of Public Enemy, so it should also be another great event. I'd like to personally thank all the members of the Sports and Entertainment Law Society for your help, Professor Cummings, Dean Armistead, Margaret Obush, Kristen Brumley, Joan Gibson, and Lewis Mackey for making this all possible today. The subject of paying college athletes has been a highly debated topic over the past couple years. Many people now believe that college athletes are being exploited, given the tremendous amounts of money that the NCAA and colleges are making off of collegiate athletic programs, and the fact that some students are receiving is a one-year revocable scholarship at best. Without further ado, I'd just like to go ahead and get into the program, given our crunch for time. I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Andre Douglas Pond Cummings, who will be our moderator, and we'll introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm pleased to see all of you here today, and I wanted to congratulate the Sports and Entertainment Law Society for putting this event together and also for helping put the Chuck D event together next week. We're really excited to have an esteemed group of panelists here. Ramogi Huma has traveled from California. Dan Fulks has traveled from Kentucky. Mike Parsons has traveled up the street. And I'm here. And we're going to talk about whether or not NCAA athletes are being exploited or whether or not the NCAA provides an opportunity. It's particularly timely. David Stern, yesterday in the news, said, I want college basketball players to have to stay in college for 2 years. I'm going to push for that, he said, in the next CBA. And then we have, on Monday night, right, national championship, University of Kentucky, with maybe 2 or 3 one-and-done players on the team, one of whom would probably be starting in the NBA this year, if not for the college rule that required him to go to college for a year. So I wanted you all to think about 2 things as an introduction before we get into our panelists speaking. Now nearly 70% of all college basketball players are African American, and much more now than 50% of college football players are African American. As I'm sure you recognize, college football and college basketball are the revenue-generating sports. Mike Parsons is here from the athletic department, and so he can correct me if I get any of these sort of ideas or statistics off a bit. The revenue-producing sports that are dominated by African-American athletes basically provide the funding for athletic departments. Most non-revenue-generating sports are not dominated by African-American athletes. Swimming, tennis, golf, rifle, I imagine. I don't know if we have a lacrosse team. I don't think we do. Those are typically peopled by non-minority athletes. And what you have here in an interesting way is African-American athletes, basketball and football, revenue-producing sports, basically providing the funding of the athletic departments to fund non-revenue-producing athletes, which are typically white athletes. You also have the NCAA benefiting dramatically from March Madness. We just all participated in our brackets, I'm sure. And most of the revenue generated by March Madness funds the entire NCAA. Once again, in my view, on the backs of minority athletes. So are minority athletes being exploited? Are they actually providing funding or opportunities for all of the other sports that don't generate revenue? That's a question that should be asked. Now, if Len Elmore was here, those of you that follow college basketball know that Len Elmore is an announcer for CBS and ESPN, also a Harvard Law School graduate, played in the NBA and the ABA, went to Harvard Law School afterwards. If Len Elmore were here, his head would explode at what I just said, because he doesn't believe that college athletes are exploited. He believes that going to college is a wonderful opportunity, an opportunity to learn, to grow, to interact. He thinks that the one rule, going to college for 1 year, and in college football it's 3 years, gives opportunity for college athletes to learn and grow and become professional. And he suggests that anyone that believes that athletes are being exploited are completely off base, that college athletes are given the opportunity to have an education and to grow and to learn how to become professional. And Len Elmore says, and this is in a book that I released with Professor LaFaso last year, Reversing Field, Len Elmore says in that book that minority athletes carry a lot of weight for the communities that they come from. Communities really invest in and count on the minority athletes being successful, and when they're unsuccessful, when they do go straight to the pros, and you can, for every Kobe Bryant or Kevin Garnett, there's a dozen of young athletes that went pro that didn't make it. It crushes the communities in a way that's much different than white athletes and what have you. So I hope to have set the table a little bit for opportunity versus exploitation. What are NCAA athletes getting? And I believe we've brought a panel together that's going to really tackle that question and give us some really insightful things to think about and comment about, and there will be a question and answer period at the end. So first of all, to my far right is Ramogi Huma. He played football at UCLA and has since founded the National College Players Association after watching the NCAA suspend his teammate at the time, Donnie Edwards, for accepting groceries when his scholarship money ran out at the end of the month. By the end of Huma's freshman year, despite billions of dollars that college athletes generate, he realized that the NCAA enforces rules that leave college athletes across the nation without basic protections. Any of you that are familiar with the NCAA rules know they're pretty interesting. You can get in trouble for a lot of things. As a former agent representing NFL athletes, there are lots of ways you can run afoul of the rules. And actually, I've heard recently that the enforcement of the NCAA believes that if you're not, as a college, reporting minor violations regularly, then there's a problem. That means that you're probably hiding larger violations, because I think we just recently reported a minor violation to the NCAA. Anyway, Ramogi Huma has a BA in sociology and a master's in public health from UCLA. He's widely appeared across the country on ESPN, 60 Minutes, Sports Illustrated, Wall Street Journal, etc., on the issue of pay for play. To the left of Ramogi Huma is Professor Dan Fulks. Professor Fulks is the director of the accounting program and the faculty athletics representative at Transylvania University in Kentucky. He has been a research consultant for the NCAA for over 20 years and is responsible for many of the oversight of financial aspects of intercollegiate athletics. For fun, Google Dan Fulks, and you'll get over 20,000 hits or citations to reports, citations, and other things that are attributed to Dr. Fulks and all of his really excellent work with research and financial oversight in connection with intercollegiate athletics. He has his bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee, an MBA from Maryland, and a Ph.D. from Georgia State. To the left of Dan Fulks is my good friend Mike Parsons, who you all know is the Deputy Athletic Director here at West Virginia University. Mike has been the Deputy Athletic Director for a decade. He's been in the athletic department for many years. I'll let him tell you how long if he wants to. And he is a mountaineer through and through. He is from Charleston, West Virginia, and received his degrees from West Virginia University, and actually worked as a sports information director at Florida State before he started his career here as in the athletic department at WVU. So we're going to start with Professor Fulks and let him introduce some of these opportunity versus exploitation ideas. Next, we'll hear from Ramogi Huma, and then we'll finish with Mike Parsons. So, Professor Fulks.
My name is Dan, and I am a recovering CPA. Started out, innocently enough, with Ernst & Ernst in Atlanta. Then Ernst & Ernst became Ernst & Whinney, then Ernst & Young. I woke up one morning actually feeling proud to be a CPA. And I said, this has got to stop. So I went back to graduate school, and here I am. But that's not why you're here. You're here to learn a little bit about Transylvania University. Let me tell you about Transylvania University. It's a small private school in Lexington, Kentucky. Speaking of Lexington, I happen to be friends with the mayor. He sends his regards and sincere appreciation for teaching us how to celebrate success. Now, when we're really happy about something, we really like to burn furniture and go car tipping. We've gone cow tipping before, but the car tipping is working out pretty well for us. Transy is, what I want to tell you about Transy, and I spent 3 wonderful years at the University of Kentucky. Before going, I was there for 19 years, but 3 of them were pretty good. And this is my 15th. It's sort of like marriages I've had. I've stayed far too long. Transy, and it's my 15th year at Transy. It's Division III school. I moved up to Division III. Was founded, what I want you to know about Transy is it's founded by Thomas Jefferson in 1780. It's the oldest university west of the Allegheny Mountains. And that's where the name comes from. It has nothing to do with vampires and bats. We are the pioneers, which are similar to mountaineers, but not quite as intimidating. And the name Transylvania, it's all Latin. I know because I took 2 years of Latin. Highly disappointed when I went to Latin America and nobody knew what I was saying. But trans means across, Sylvan means woods. So we were first school across the woods being the Alleghenies. And we have a letter from Mr. Jefferson to the people of Virginia saying what the people of Virginia need is a school like they have in Kentucky. He said all our finest young men go to Kentucky to go to school and they don't come home. So some years later, University of Virginia was founded with the pattern of that we had at Transy. But that's not why you're here. And it is good to be here. It's my first visit to campus, and it's good to see a friendly campus. I was at the University of Pittsburgh a couple of months ago on business, and I got stopped by campus police at Pittsburgh, and they actually detained me for an hour and a half because they suspected me of trying to smuggle in some textbooks. But once they searched my car, they turned me loose. But that's not why you're here. You're here to hear about the Catholics. So just one quick story about the Catholics, and I know you're out there. And it's a tragic story. There were 3 nuns who died in a fiery car crash not long ago, and true story. So they went to heaven, and they're standing outside the gates of heaven, and St. White's name met them at the gate. Peter. St. Peter met him at the gate and said, it's good to see you nuns here. Sorry about your luck down there, but you'll be happy here. But we have a formality here. We can't let you in until you have to answer one question, simple question. Then you can come on in. So who wants to be first? Sister Rachel stepped up and said, all right, I'll be first. And St. Peter thought for a moment. He said, well, who was the first man on earth? Sister Rachel said, Adam. And the gates swung open and the angels sang and Sister Rachel walked through the gates. It's a true story. All right, who wants to be next? Sister Jen. I'll go next. So she steps up, and St. Peter says, well, who was the first woman on earth? Eve. And the gates swung open, and the angels sang. Angels did sing, and Sister Jen walked through the gates. All right, Sister Claire, you're next. Just one little simple question. So she stepped up, and St. Peter thought for a minute and said, well, what's the first thing that Eve said to Adam? And Sister Claire thought for a minute. She looked down. She said, boy, that's a hard one. And the gates opened, and the angels sang. I was told there'd be no parents in the group, so, but that's not why you're here. I hope you didn't come expecting a food fight between Ramogi and me. We've been here before and sat next to each other before. I had no particular dog in this. Well, first of all, there's no food. I was told there'd be food. Secondly, we get along marvelously well. We're on the same side. If I'm on any side, I'm pathologically indecisive. So I have no dogs in this fight. What I want to do is lay down some framework within which we're having to operate. And this is financial stuff, so bear with me. I know there are English majors in the crowd, but and speaking of English majors, what I've been working on for a long time now is I can't figure out another word for synonym. So I want to lay some financial information down for you, and then I'll get out of the way, believe it or not. And these are numbers that I collect. For 20 years or so, I've been collecting the data, financial data from all 1,100 institutions. We've made some significant changes in what we collect and how we collect it and how we report it since 2004. A couple of those changes are relevant to what we have going on today. So these are my numbers. I collect them, I tabulate them, I analyze them, and I report them. And we're reporting median numbers these days rather than mean numbers because of primarily the outliers, the unusually large contributions that several schools in the FBS have received in recent years totally distort mean numbers, such as Oklahoma State and the group in Columbus. So the median total revenue reported, and we're going to limit this to FBS, I think, median total revenue reported is about $48 million for the typical FBS athletics institution, athletics department. That's a little misleading, though, because, and these numbers, if you look at the EADA reports, Equity in Athletics Disclosure Act, they don't agree with our numbers because what we've done since 2004 is we separate revenues in two groups. We have generated revenues and allocated revenues. Generated revenues are those that are generated by athletics themselves. Allocated revenues come from the institution one way or another. Allocated revenues include direct support from the institution, as writing a check from general fund to athletics. Indirect support, which might include maintaining the facilities for athletics, paying utilities for athletics, operating the academic center. That's indirect support. Student fees are allocated revenues. That's just another way of hiking up your tuition. And if that's directed toward athletics, we consider that a transfer from the institution to athletics. And then any number that comes directly from the state capital, we consider allocated athletics. So we separate that, and we focus on generated revenues, which are what athletics generate for themselves, such as ticket sales, such as contributions from alumni, such as distributions from the conference and from the NCAA, that sort of thing. TV rights, TV contracts, that sort of thing. So although we've got a mean number of $48 million for total revenues, the median generated revenue number is about $35 million. So the gap between 35 and 48 is essentially what's coming from the institution. And by the way, the largest reported generated revenue in the FBS, and these numbers are from the 2010 fiscal year. I have 2011 now, and we're working on it. The largest reported was almost $144 million. So you can see the gap between the largest and the smallest. The gap between the largest, 144, and the median is significant. Football, about 58% of football programs in the FBS do show a profit with just generated revenues. So it's a little under 60%. And the generated revenues from typical football program is about $16 million. The largest is $94 million. Again, you see a pretty wide gap between basically the haves and the have-nots. Men's basketball, again, just under 60% will show a profit if you look only at generated revenues. But those numbers are a lot smaller. Men's basketball, and this does not include Final Four March Madness money. That money goes through the NCAA to the conferences, and it's distributed based upon how many games conference teams participate in over a 6-year period, rolling average. So the median basketball revenues, not including that, are about $4.8 million, significantly less than football revenues. The largest is $26 million. On the expense side, median expense, total expenses, almost $47 million. The largest is $130 million. Again, a pretty wide gap. And the median loss for the 120 schools in the FBS is $9.5 million. That's the median loss for all 120 schools. In Ramogi, let me give a couple more numbers, and I want you to respond to them. For the 2010 fiscal year, there were 22 schools in the FBS that reported profits from athletics. And those 22 schools showed an average profit, a median profit, of about $7.5 million. The other 98 schools showed a loss of about $11.5 million. So again, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is about $18 million. And it's this gap that concerns me more than anything else. Being I suppose, a Democrat, if I had to choose, more a socialist than anything. But I'm also concerned with the gap between the haves and have-nots in society. And whoever said that athletics is a microcosm of society was absolutely right. So it's that gap, which grows larger every year, that really concerns me, and how we can be fair for one extreme and the other without widening the gap even further. I mean, think about what we have. We have a subdivision, or we have a division, Division 3, which is pretty varied, but we even have the subdivision where you have Bowling Green State University in the same subdivision as Ohio State University, and they're trying to compete with one another. Let me mention one other thing, because Ramogi and I want to get after this one. And by the way, there's a lot of talk about how much money we're spending on athletics. If you look at the institutional budget compared with athletics budget, pretty much across the board it's about 5%, just looking at total expenses. If you net revenues, athletic revenues, against the expenses, that number comes down to about 3% or less. So that's not a very big chunk of the institutional budget. The other thing I want to mention, and we'll get back, but is that what we call the growth gap, or the increase gap. We look at, and these are dashboard indicators, we look at the rate of growth in athletics expenditures compared with the rate of growth for the institution. And for the past several years, that's been right at 0, which means there is no gap between the growth rates, which means the institutional budget is growing just as quickly, just as much as the athletics budget. Ramogi, I've been up here long enough, so you take it.
How you guys doing today? All right, first I'd like to thank the WVU Sports and Entertainment Law Society for having me. And I'd also like to point out a few facts in regards to the discussion about whether or not college athletes should receive salaries. An NCAA study revealed that college athletes spend about 40 hours in their sport per week alone. In return, they receive payments in the form of scholarships worth tens of thousands of dollars, a portion of which is taxed by the IRS as income. The truth is that college athletes are already paid to play. So while the fuss over this topic, Walter Byers, who served as the NCAA president for over 35 years, confessed in his book that the NCAA sought to convince the public that such payments were not actually payments, so that the member colleges could avoid paying workers' compensation. The NCAA literally invented the word student-athlete, referred to payments as scholarships, and hired publicists to promote its propaganda. So let's not drink the Kool-Aid. To have an honest discussion, we first need to realize that the NCAA and its colleges have no problem paying players. They've done so for almost 60 years. The real issue is that the NCAA and its colleges don't want to increase payments to college athletes. And the question shouldn't be whether or not college athletes should be paid. We should be talking about whether or not some or all college athletes should be paid more, and if so, in what form. College athletes will be the first to tell you how fortunate they are to have their opportunities, and I think that's kind of the title of this, whether or not it's opportunity or exploitation. College athletes recognize they definitely have a good opportunity. And I'd argue that the vast majority of college athletes don't have the grounds to call for an increase in pay because their teams generate net losses, no different than the average high school team or Division II team or Division III team. However, this panel has been put together because big-time college football and men's basketball programs generate billions of dollars per year. And unlike other Americans, they're not allowed to capitalize on their fair market value. In a fair market, the top Division I teams, which are in the FBS division, have football players that would be worth an average of about $121,000 per year, and basketball players would be worth about $265,000 per year each. Texas football players would be worth over $500,000 per year, and the basketball players that made it to this year's Final Four averaged a fair market value of $846,000 each. Despite these athletes' fair market value, NCAA rules leave 85% of Division I players living below the federal poverty line. Still, some will argue that schools can't possibly afford traditional salaries to players because most programs lose money. This is generally true among non-FBS schools, but they fail to point out that the average net profits from football and basketball are $9.5 million and $2.5 million per year, respectively. In addition, the FBS schools are receiving about $800 million in new revenue from TV deals, recent TV deals. The truth is that most FBS athletic programs don't have a revenue problem, they have a spending problem. And I think Professor Fulks just touched on some of those issues. FBS programs spend about $6.3 million more on non-revenue sports when compared to other Division I schools. This means that FBS schools could spend $6.3 million less on these sports and still fully compete in Division I. This doesn't count the excessive spending in FBS football and men's basketball programs, some of which includes multi-million-dollar coaching salaries. So there's definitely enough money to pay many of the FBS football and men's basketball players a salary. For those who worry that providing actual salaries for football and men's basketball players would hurt other sports, they should take a close look at non-FBS schools in Division I and Division II, where the majority of football and basketball teams lose money, yet other sports flourish. These players still receive athletic scholarships. Coaches are still hired. Teams still play full seasons, travel, and participate in postseason championships. Others argue that Title IX would prevent schools from providing salaries to football and men's basketball players. And this is false. Title IX author and former Ivy League president Jeff Orleans has gone on record saying that Title IX would not apply to football and men's basketball programs that paid their players a salary, because these programs would be considered unrelated business activities over which Title IX does not have jurisdiction. But even if Title IX did apply, then the payment increase could be split evenly between football and men's basketball players and female athletes. Title IX is a consideration, but by no means would it prevent paying football and men's basketball players a salary. Now, despite outlining the reasons that that paying football and men's basketball players a salary is feasible, my organization, which is the National College Players Association, is not advocating for players to receive salaries. We're advocating for basic protections and an increase in graduation rates. For instance, the NCAA does not mandate that colleges pay for any sports-related medical expenses. It's optional, and players are too often stuck with sports-related medical bills. Permanently injured players can have their scholarships taken away. College football and men's basketball players' graduation rates hover around 50%. And despite the billions of dollars per year that they generate, the NCAA caps so-called full scholarships below the price tag of the school, leaving unsuspecting players with about $3,000 to $5,000 per year in out-of-pocket educational-related expenses. And while there are many opinions about whether or not college athletes should receive professional salaries, we should all be able to agree that at least they deserve basic protections. Thank you very much.
Professor Fulks, I've worked on a staff that included Rich Rodriguez and Bob Huggins, so you see why I don't try to be a talented speaker like yourself. So, and Dre, I think you know my respect for the law profession, in particular as it relates to athletics. You know, we've had many conversations and many opportunities to be here as well to talk about how the legal piece has reached into to college sports. I've learned a lot about buyouts, liquidated damages, and just for your information, Rich Rodriguez is fully paid, and as of yesterday, John Beeline has fully paid their liquidated damages back to our university. I've also learned, particularly in the last year, a lot about mediation. And if you call $20 million a settlement is a successful mediation, then it was a successful mediation to it all. But I have learned a lot here in the last few years, particularly on that part of it all. But on this particular subject, quite honestly, I'm undecided. I'm wishy-washy. I'm on both sides of the fence of things. As an administrator, I'm close to it all. I see things every day from a college athlete, what we do to make money, generate money, to run our programs. But it's really difficult for me to take a stance on things. I look at West University. We operate 17 sports here and over 500 student athletes who receive either some support financially or at least the services of the athletic program. And if our charge as a university, the athletic department, is to fund that, and particularly West Virginia, to fund it without it being a burden upon the university. So we call ourselves self-sufficient. This year will be a little challenge when we balance the books because of that buyout piece of it all, but that is our goal, to run our athletic program without being a burden upon the university as a whole. To do that, we have to try to maximize our revenues, whether it's through television, through conference revenues, tickets, private giving, licensing. Our particular budget, we have a $60 million operating budget, and we'll spend just about all $60 million of that this year. Some years we'll generate a profit that will carry over to the next year. But to be successful in generating the money, we also have to be successful in the field. And to do that, we have to invest in our program. We have to invest in facilities. We have to invest in quality coaches, outstanding coaches, which we're paying the market value. The market is driving up what head coaches, particularly in football and men's basketball, what they're paid each year. And as you said before, our two sports that generate all the money, quite frankly, are football and men's basketball. But they support those 15 other sports and give the opportunities for those athletes in those 15 other sports to be successful. The revenue that each schools are making has become very popular in the media today. And a lot of that is driven because of all the conference realignments, the TV revenues that are coming about. And you see more and more attention to that. We're going to go from a situation in the Big East where this year we would have made $9 million from our share of the Big East. Once we get to full share in the Big 12, we're going to go to $18 million. So you can see a substantial increase, but our operating expenses will go up as well. What drives all that? Obviously is success. What drives that are the success of the student athletes. What are they getting out of it? Yes, they're getting the scholarship. I agree with Lynn Elmore. They're getting the scholarship. They're getting the successful career path to create other opportunities beyond athletics. But look at it from a student-athlete perspective, and I'm uniquely close to that as well. I have two children. Both of them are Division I athletes. They're at small schools, one in Kentucky, well, actually both in Kentucky. My daughter played 4 years of soccer at Morehead State. My son is a walk-on basketball player at Eastern Kentucky, and as of 2 days ago, also a walk-on baseball player. So he's getting his mileage out of it all. So I see it from a very close perspective from a student athlete. Even though Division 1A, 1AA, or FCS in this particular case are a lot less high profile than what we have at our level, But I do see what it is. I see our student athletes every day. And yes, there are a lot of student athletes who struggle to make ends meet. What's that do? It tempts them to break the rules, frankly. You know, you have to monitor what's going on and make sure that the rules are being abided by. But there is temptation by the student athlete because they are in situations economically that force that temptation. But the student athlete's success on the field drives additional revenues for the schools. It drives ticket sales. It drives TV ratings. It drives licensing revenue. There's no question that their success on the field or on the court is generating profit back to the athletic department or the university that's supporting those programs. But it's our duty as administrators to monitor that piece of it all. We have to sit there. We have an obligation to the student athlete as well as the NCAA to monitor, to make sure that the student athlete is not being exploited, not being taken advantage of. But there's certain pieces of it, and realistically, you can't lose. You can't take it away. Geno Smith's success on the field is fully visible for everyone to see. It's fully visible for the Bowl Scouts to see it, the TV executives to see it, the licensing people. Everybody sees what's happening. You can't avoid that piece of it all. But we do have to do our job to protect the student athlete. I do think the NCAA under Dr. Emmerich, who's been on as the new president of the NCAA for the last year or two, I can't remember how long he's been here, but he's made some very substantial steps in it. And most notably, what's on the table right now is to provide a student athlete with a $2,000 stipend each year in addition to their scholarship money. And they're using this term of the total cost of education, which obviously exceeds tuition, room, and board. So that's on the table. But what came about, he brought it forth last year, but it happened so quickly. And when he brought it forth, the membership voted it down. And I feel like the main reason they voted it down is because it moved too quick. And bureaucracies, particularly universities, don't move that quickly. But there is a new proposal. There's actually 3 options in a new proposal that's on the table right now that's up for discussion for later this month. I frankly think it'll probably be voted down again because I think it's moving along too quickly. There's some people that feel like it's going to be voted down as well, but it'll come back up again, maybe in a fine-tuned form later in the summertime. But the 3 options that are on the table right now is going back to the $2,000 a year scholarship, or in addition to the scholarship. But what it would be, they've expanded it because there was too many questions the first time it came around. Is the $2,000, is that for every student athlete? Is it for just those who get full scholarships? Is it just for football and basketball? Is it for those who get what we call equivalent scholarships? You may not know this, but a football player and a basketball player receive full scholarships. That's the only scholarship aid you can get. If you're a women's soccer player, you can get what's called an equivalency sport. As a whole, we're getting about 11 scholarships for soccer. We can divide that up among 22 people, or 28 people if we want to. So you have to deal with equivalency. But how do you deal with a $2,000 piece when it comes to equivalency? But what's on the table right now is bringing it back, is $2,000 for every full scholarship recipient, or a percentage of that if you're an equivalency sport. So if you're getting $500 in aid for volleyball, for instance, then you're going to get a percentage of that $2,000 to help underwrite your costs. For us at WVU, that expense will be about $500,000 new expenses each year. That's what it's going to cost us to do it. The second thing of it is based on that $200,000 or $2,000 is based upon need, and that will end up ultimately driving through your financial aid office, which obviously creates another workload on another unit on campus, and there's some issues that have to be worked through to make all that happen. And the third one is called, there's a fund that's provided to each athletic department. It's called a Student Athlete Opportunity Fund. That if you're in a unique situation, say you have a student athlete who does not have the means to have a winter coat, we can go buy him a winter coat. The conference gives us the revenue to do that. You have to meet certain guidelines, certain restrictions, but you can do that. If there's a funeral that they need to attend from a parent, they can't get back to California, we can pay for that through that Student Athlete Opportunity Fund. But what they're talking about is allowing the schools to supplement their student athlete opportunity fund and then put that $2,000 in their pocket through that piece of it all. So the stipend concept is certainly making progress to benefiting the student athlete. But there's issues that still exist with each one of those. One, can every school afford it? $500,000. We can. But can every school afford it? You know, you can look at University of Maryland, big school, same size as we are. I'm not sure that they're in a financial situation right now that they could afford that additional $500,000. I know my schools down in Kentucky couldn't. Those two small schools there couldn't, but they're a little different level. The recruiting advantages. First of all, this is not mandated. This is not mandated that a school has to do that. But if you don't do it, think of the recruiting disadvantage you put yourself in, your school in, when you're competing against the big boys and they're able to provide that piece of it all. I don't like the idea of the student athlete opportunity fund piece of it because I think it gives too much flexibility out there for the schools to abuse the rules, put more money in a big-time recruit's pocket. It's just too much discretion involved with the schools. But the rules and regulations that the NCAA has, while it's certainly broad and a very thick manual, it does work to create a level playing ground among schools, where that one school has the opportunity to do the other. The stipend piece of it is potentially separating that piece of it out even further, because the big boys who can afford it versus the others who cannot afford it. You know, we need the resources from what's the success of the student athletes have in football and basketball. We need that to provide the opportunities for the other sports. That's not hidden. I mean, we need that part to fund it all. And if we did not have the revenue coming into it, or if it would have to be relied upon the university as a whole to provide us the money, and that would take away from the academic side of it all. So we need them to be successful and to give us opportunities to help fund our other sports. As you can see, there's pros and cons on both sides of it all. I have no straight opinion on the thing, to be honest with you. It is a very difficult thing because I do think you need to provide opportunities for student athletes, particularly those who put yourself in it, put the program to be successful, and you have an obligation to help support them to do that. The $2,000 stipend is a start, but there is no easy answer to it all.
Let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you all very much. Before we give you the opportunity to ask questions, I had a few follow-up comments that I wanted to make for us to think about to sort of perhaps generate some questions for each of our panelists. And I thought everything that was said today was interesting and provocative. Ramogi Huma says that statistically, the Final Four athletes generated over $800,000 per player for their university?
No, right? No. They actually are worth that. That means, and we base this off of the collective bargaining agreement with the NBA, 50% player split. So if you took their revenues that they generate for their schools, cut that in half, divide that by 13 scholarships, then each player is worth $847,000. They generate twice that much overall.
So we're talking about players generating twice, if I'm understanding correctly, $800,000 of revenue generated. Let me just describe a few ways that's possible. I mean, this is obviously, in this circumstance, TV money, gate receipts, et cetera. What number is Geno Smith? What number does he wear on his back? Number 12. If you were to go to the bookstore today, could you get a number 12 jersey? How many number 12 jerseys are there in Milan Park or Milan Stadium every Saturday that we play? Jay Williams from Duke estimates that his jersey sales, how many years did he play? Did he play all four?
I believe so.
4 years there was over $2 million of Jay Williams jersey sales. And Geno Smith, wherever Geno is today, is probably generating dozens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from number 12. It doesn't say Smith on the back because that would be an NCAA rule violation, but it's number 12. Geno Smith and Jay Williams don't see a penny of that money. They get their opportunity and their scholarship and the things that Mike talked about, but generate millions of dollars in revenue for whomever benefits. Ed O'Bannon played for UCLA when UCLA won its last national title in basketball. And you all help me if I get this off a little bit, but NCAA athletes waive their image rights when they become an athlete at a university. The NCAA has contracted with EA Sports or whatever games to have these college athletes in sort of college athletic games. And Ed O'Bannon in the class action has sued because Ed O'Bannon, number 31, UCLA, doesn't say his name on the back of his jersey or identify him in the game, has generated millions, if not billions of dollars of revenue in video games that Ed O'Bannon has not seen a penny from. And where does that lawsuit stand today?
It's still active, and it's basically for former players. And the thing is, as an athlete, you're forced to sign a waiver. I mean, it's not voluntary. There's no option. You can't play. They're not going to let you on the field or give you your scholarship unless you sign away your publicity rights, which is being tried as an antitrust violation, is what it is. And for former players, you stop signing that because for current players, you sign once a year. When you're a former player, you don't sign that any longer. Therefore, they should have no rights at all to continue to use your image in perpetuity, and that's what the basis of the lawsuit's about.
So Ed O'Bannon's actively engaged now with the class action with lots of former players, where today you can buy a video game and number 31 from UCLA is still playing, and Ed O'Bannon still does not receive a penny because he waived these rights, and that money that's contractually agreed to with the NCAA. Again, a huge money-making opportunity that doesn't go to players. The NFL licenses, the NFLPA licenses the images, and players, professional players have control of their own images. Some of the players that I represented got a check every year from their video game likeness being used in a professional setting, yet former players don't get a penny generated from sort of these college video games. And lastly, I wanted to mention, and President Hardesty's here with us, and he's mentioned in my sports law class many times before, that when he was president of the university, they would have a press conference to announce the budget for the next sort of academic year. And as Professor Fulks said, the athletic department budget is 5% of the overall, budget for the university. So when he stood up to discuss the budget for the athletic department, the room was filled with reporters and tape recorders and microphones to discuss 5% of the overall university budget. When he finished, if I'm paraphrasing President Hardesty correctly, when he finished the athletic department budget, the room emptied, and 2 or 3 people stayed to hear the university budget, which was 95% of the overarching cost for the university, and no one was interested in hearing the university budget discussed, which was 95% more than the athletic department budget, which is why this is so important, because we love this. We love college athletics, and when the NCAA started, I don't think it imagined that billions and billions of dollars of revenue would be generated in television contracts, gate receipts, jersey sales, et cetera, et cetera. We're in a different realm now. We're in a different world, and the question is, are we doing it right? Are we doing it right? Have we modernized the way that we do amateurism, student athletics, et cetera, et cetera? So with those comments, we want to open up the floor to you. If you'll please step to the microphone since we're web streaming this and ask us any questions that's on your mind. Unless any of you have comments before we get into Q&A. I think it's on.
Is it on? If I may, come on down to the mic, though. I just want to mention a couple of things. I'll tell you what frustrates Mike and people like him as much as anything. And I want to bring this up because Ramogi and I are trying to get some traction on this. The frustrating part is if you take 2 expense lines from the budget, athletics budget, you account for half of the expenditures. The first one being compensation, which Mike mentioned himself is market-driven. If you want to hire the best coach because he or she can recruit the best, you're going to have to pay what the market demands. And the second one is grants and aid, which is less than 30%. But those 2 together are about half of the total budget. The third one at about 14% is facilities, maintenance and rental. Ramogi and I have some question. Well, what frustrates Mike is neither of those are under his control. He's stuck with market demands for compensation, and with grants and aid, that's whatever it costs to go to the university. And, he multiplies that by 250 scholarships that he gives, about 250 or so, about half of his student athletes. And, there's not much you can do about that. And if you're trying to compare one school with another, you compare West Virginia with Notre Dame, that line item is very different. And it's not a matter of how much we're choosing to spend. It's what the university charges for a student to come here. Now, what Ramogi and I are trying to get traction for is we question whether that grants and aid number is a true expense for athletics or for the school. And I was so excited to have this conversation with him in Louisville a while back because I can't get anybody to listen to me, and I think he brought it up before I did. Unless that student athlete who's on scholarship, unless she bumps somebody out of the class that is normally paying fees, then she really hasn't cost the university anything except room and board. So if we're really trying to see what athletics cost the institution, I think we need to reach a point where we can do something about this grants and aid number, which is a significant part of the budget that's reported. Ramogi, you want to?
Oh, no, I think you laid it out pretty well, and actually it kind of goes into one of our goals, which is, I mentioned our organization is not trying to advocate for salaries for players, but there are things that universities can do within NCAA rules, and we've looked closely at this because we're trying to get universities, whether it be by state laws or to voluntarily, look at what they can do for players who have not graduated. What does it really cost a university? You mentioned $9 million in new money coming into West Virginia University. The federal graduation rate for the football team is 56%. I'm sorry, 56% for football here and 54% for basketball. What's to stop the university from applying some of those new revenues into continuing education for these guys so they can actually get their degree? Scholarship is great. It's important. It's the means to an education. But these guys are spending 40 hours a week in their sport alone. The university, I think you made a great case. They have to look to see, find new revenue streams and keep the ball rolling. But what can't get lost is what the NCAA and the schools have been saying is the most important thing, and that's the degree. Not necessarily scholarship, the degree. Half these guys here at this school and across the nation are not graduating. They're not getting a degree. There's an influx of new money. Pac-12 schools are getting almost $15 million in new money every year. What are they going to do with this money? What will West Virginia do with this money? Will they really, invest a portion? And we're not saying all, but a portion of this. Can they redirect a portion? I know the university president's here somewhere too. Mm-hmm. Great for him to have. And this is the time right now because, as you mentioned, expenses are going to go up. But how they go up is up to West Virginia University. They can say, well, let's prioritize this here. Let's make sure our guys are really getting a chance to graduate, increase our graduation rates. And actually, that can be a magnet for recruits as well, because no other university in the nation is doing that. They leave their players out high and dry. But to get to some of these numbers, you do have to assess, well, what does it truly cost the university? Does it cost the university anything for players whose eligibility has expired to maintain their spot in the classroom? And that is one part of the answer. But regardless of how much it costs, we know there's an influx of new money. Every single major conference has an influx of new money. West Virginia is going to have $9 million per year. And what are they going to do with it? Is it going to go straight to coaches' salaries and facilities? Because that's what the NCAA report has been. They say it's basically, they've reported that virtually all of the new revenue in the last generation in athletics has gone to coaches' salaries and facilities. Is that going to continue to be the trend, or are schools going to start finding ways to maybe guarantee health care? And I don't know what West Virginia's policy is, but can West Virginia step up and say, you know what, with this new money, we're also going to mandate that our school pays for every sports-related medical expense that our athletes incur? We're going to actually invest in continuing education. These are some of the things that they can do, and I just don't think it really has been brought up. Next week we have a bill in California that would actually force the California schools to do that with some of the new money, the schools that can afford it. And I know some of this, there is concern about competitive equity. And I think Mike Slive, he's the SEC commissioner, he hit it right on the head. He called competitive equity an illusion. Because whereas West Virginia has $9 million in new money, and is leaps and bounds above the University of Idaho in revenue, there's no competitive equity between the two schools. Idaho is not paying their coaches millions of dollars. Idaho is not getting $9 million a year in new money. You know, they can't build big facilities. They have a Kibbie Dome that fits 10,000 people in their stadium. I know because my brother went there. So he used to play there. That's why I talk about Idaho a lot. But these are some of the things. In one statistic to back all this up, this is not just hyperbole, since 1985, over 90% of all top 25 football teams and Final Four basketball teams have come from the 6 have conferences. There is no competitive equity. So that should not be a reason to deny benefits to players from schools that are from the conferences that have resources. So this is something I'd like to hear maybe Mike comment on and maybe even the university president to talk about what West Virginia would do for its athletes with this new money.
Well, let me give you some examples of some of the things both of you all said. First of all, as far as scholarships, is it really money? I guess that depends on each campus. On our campus, we pay a scholarship bill of over $7 million a year. We literally transact money to pay for that scholarship. So I realize in some campuses and previously back in the early 80s, we used to have something called tuition waivers, which a university does have available at certain units around the campus, but athletics no longer receives that. Other schools, that does exist, but not at WVU. Another thing you mentioned about the what we refer to as post-eligibility, continuing education, we do provide that. Have provided that to our student athletes for more than 15 years, where a student athlete, I'll give you a Major Harris, for example. Major Harris left early, played football, did a great job as far as building the stature of our program, did not make it in the pros. He came back. We funded his education so he could finish his undergraduate degree. We do that every year at every sport. So I'm very proud that we're able to do that piece of it.
Policy across?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's something we've been able to do for over 15 years, and we do that as part of our budget. As far as the health care, as far as WVU goes, I realize that's different from school to school, but we provide insurance coverage and support the financial impact of any injury that occurs of any of our student athletes, of any of our sports. Again, I refer back to being a parent. My daughter tore her ACL, had to go through the whole thing, another campus. Fortunately, it was all paid for. My insurance was the primary carrier. The university was the secondary, but then they picked up any loose ends after that piece of it all. That's what we do at West Virginia, just to give you a little bit of insight to it all. I do want to preface one thing about the $9 million in new income. That is going to happen, but we are in a graduated stage, so we will not see that full $9 million in additional revenue for 4 or 5 years. And the one thing that Professor Fulks mentioned earlier in his talk was about the EADA report. The frustration as an administrator is the EADA report is, in theory, supposed to give you an opportunity to compare one school against the other. But what happens in reality is every school interprets things differently. So you don't have the opportunity to truly compare how those scholarship revenues are expended. Those sort of things. So while it's certainly a point to reference, it's hard to say that it's a solid point because not everybody's interpreting things the same way.
Just to follow up, so on the medical expenses, I know so West Virginia has a secondary insurance policy. Does West Virginia allow players to incur any out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles or co-insurance?
No.
Okay, that's good. Well, I think those are good answers, great answers, and I wish West Virginia was the standard, if that's the case, because most universities, unfortunately, don't have many of those provisions in place. But it's good to hear that here at West Virginia. I think you guys should be proud of that at this school because those are definitely major issues.
Let me say something else about the new money. The SEC, Commissioner Slide thinks that's going to be close to $20 million per school of new money. My data indicate that, I indicated that 22 schools made a profit overall athletics in 2010. We expected that to jump up in 2011, and it did to 23. And the gap between the haves and have-nots grew by another $1 million. But if you look at the frequency distributions, there are about 80% of those schools losing money are losing less than $20 million. So and again, I think we're going to see more separation. But at least in the major conferences, the what I consider the BCS conferences, which of course doesn't include the Big Least, they have not renegotiated their contract, by the way, but the others have. And so at least those schools who are, at the bottom financially of those conferences, this new money, when we see the full effect of it, it's probably going to put them into a profitable situation. And the EADA report frustrates all of us. The purpose, that comes from the Department of Education, the purpose of EADA is to monitor Title IX and gender expenditures, which is why they don't care much about revenues. It also makes it difficult to compare one school with another. You're right, absolutely right about that.
I think, too, when talking about salaries, salaries for players, and you mentioned, here at West Virginia how, you want to keep in the black and everything, but, with $9 million coming in on average over the contract, I mean, it's all backloaded, most of these contracts. There's a lot of merit for the idea, There's new money coming in. There's a lot of excess expenditures, In terms of a market, we talked about the market for coaches and facilities. It's not a fair market overall because there's a bubble demand for coaches. Their salaries are artificially very, very high. The facilities expenditures, in the arms race, they're artificially prioritized because all this is what you alluded to earlier is to chase recruits. Whereas in a fair market, you wouldn't need those things to chase recruits. You would pay them. And that money, so much of the money, instead of going to the coaches and the facilities, would be directed to the athletes whose fair market value actually drive the whole system. So this current market is truly, it's a tough one for the schools because they do want to get the best coaches. But it's not a market that actually you see anywhere else in America because there's antitrust laws against these types of things. In no other industry can you see organizations, companies get together and compete, who are supposed to be competing, get together and say, you know what, let's pay our labor less. Let's not pay so much for these inputs for what we need for our industry. There's antitrust laws against that. And, this is very obviously the similar situation what's going on in college sports. The schools, all the universities in the whole nation are colluding through the NCAA to agree to price fix scholarships, their labor, what would probably be the biggest expenses for their industry. And there have been antitrust issues that the NCAA has lost in the past, and they're very vulnerable on this. I think regardless of whether or not anyone feels like college athletes are, should receive salaries, this whole system is one antitrust lawsuit away from tearing it all down in terms of the facade of amateurism and, the agreement among universities who are supposed to be competing to collude and kind of set these prices. These are artificially low because obviously recruiting is the lifeblood of all these programs, and they would otherwise be getting a lot more money. So I just wanted to throw that out there, food for thought. And I think some of this is it's ultimately going to be in the courts. One question is why is it such a hot topic now? Well, between conference realignments, scandals that are inevitable because you're trying to force what would be a fair market into a black market, money's going to get to the athletes one way or another. And also the new television contracts. When so much money's coming in, and you can't find this situation anywhere else in America, questions start to fly. And I don't think it's really going to hold up. I think the NCAA and the schools have been getting a lot of leeway over the years, just kind of as guardians of the sport, and who have reasonably looked out for college athletes over the years. But I think in the last few decades, as the money's exploded and nothing's changed for college athletes, it's just a matter of time before that arrangement falls on its face.
We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Thank you very much for your talk today and the discussion. Mr. Parsons, you talked about the athletic department being self-sustaining. Is that really, I would imagine that many departments are striving to try to create their own revenue so they can have the autonomy away from the academic part. So is that really an inherent problem that the athletic departments are striving to create their own funding so that, and essentially they're putting more pressure on the student athletes to create more revenue. Thank you.
Our goal is not to create autonomy, because while we are a self-sufficient unit of the university, we're still bound by the same rules and regulations that any other department in the university do. We still have to hire our people the same way. We still have to purchase things the same way. We still have we're under the jurisdiction of the president of the university. So we're not trying to create an autonomy from that side up. Frankly, what we're trying to do is not be a burden upon the academic piece of the university. We don't want to go into it and take something away from chemistry or law school or whatever. Our goal is to not do that piece of it. Now, I will tell you, it's becoming more and more of a challenge to do that piece of it all. And one of the things that the way the NCAA now today, the NCAA will evaluate whether you're totally making a profit. They will not put us into that category today. Reason being is because of student fees. We have student fees that comes through the university, and because we take those student fees in that way, they won't put us into that piece of it all, because we make, a couple $1 million a year in student fees that come through. And because that's supported from the university, then they will not include us into that category. We interpret it a little bit differently because we provide tickets and access to our athletic events in exchange for those student fees. But
President Hardesty? Sure.
How y'all doing? Thanks for coming. This question, it didn't really come up. With the APR going on now, and you see like UConn getting in trouble, and you see how much these Final Four players are worth, and they're banned from going to that. Obviously, they're going to have to put students on the academic schedule now, in addition to the athletic schedule. And is that not reducing their academic freedom, I guess, to like choose their class and what their scholarship would actually be worth then, if they had the opportunities that a normal student would get to choose? And so the scholarship wouldn't be as much to a student athlete who has to be on a certain schedule freshman, sophomore, junior year, or else they're losing $800K per that athlete.
I'll give you my perspective on it. I don't think it's hurting that piece. Our academic advisor maybe could answer that question in a little bit more detail than I can. What it's doing is giving more opportunities. We do have to manage their academic schedule better. There's no question about it, because their eligibility is based upon that. But what you're finding is more and more student athletes are going to summer school. And they're expanding their opportunities throughout the year beyond just the traditional fall and spring semesters, which ultimately means we're paying for it. We're paying. We have $1 million plus summer school bill each year. So I understand where you're going with that, but I don't know that I could say that it's damaging or hurting it. I think what it's doing is we're able to expand the opportunities there a little bit, but we are having to manage it, no question.
I'd like to weigh in real quick on that. Actually, USA Today did a study and found that over 84% of Division I schools have athletic programs where athletes are clustered into jock majors. I was in one. I actually like sociology, but I was still in one. It looked like a locker room, okay? Sociology at UCLA is a jock major. Same with history, okay? And the vast majority of colleges, I don't know if West Virginia is included or not. So there have been traditional pressures where players are fed into these majors to keep them eligible. And there is a question, and I think the NCAA, they have statistics saying, well, look, if you get a college degree, you're going to make $1 million over the lifetime above and beyond someone who didn't. And I think there's a lot of validity in that. But for college athletes, it's not quite $1 million because they're not the pre-med students. They're not some of the higher-paying majors that would actually benefit them throughout life. It keeps them eligible.
And I guess it ties into the continuing education part and the obligation that each school chooses to take. Because I went to Middle Tennessee State, which is a smaller school, and I played and everything. But I know after that time, if you get fast-tracked by going through summer school, if you get to that 4th, 5th year, and you happen to be midway through grad school, and you graduate with some grad school left, and the university gets to decide based on your past or whatever, or even when you graduate that fast, what they want to do. I guess it ties into the obligation each university takes, and that's the money each one would have, I was assuming. So I didn't know how to handle that. Thank you.
I will add one thing about when that all came out about clustering, and clearly I think there's probably some majors that are more popular than others across campus as well as athletic. But our faculty senate looked at our majors of our student athletes, the classes they were taking, determined, again, here, that we were not really in that same model. So.
I'm a former president, not a president.
Okay.
There's a huge difference. I've got a sweater on today.
You're recovering president?
Recovering president. I do want to clarify Professor Cummings' story. It is essentially correct, but it's not about me. It's about Deputy Director Parsons and the athletic director who were giving their strategic plan for the future of athletics. And there were 13 reporters there to cover that event. And when they finished their report, Mike, you may remember, you all went out to give individual sound bites to the reporters, and the university took up the university budget without coverage. And, but your percentage, I mean, you're essentially correct in the attitude. The comment I wanted to make is that this is a cultural divide, and it is being driven by several dynamic factors. One of them is that states are pressed for funding due to prisons, health care, and other sources. And education is gradually, the percentage of the budget devoted to education is gradually being reduced. And that number gets very low. At Virginia, it's probably under 10% is now state subsidy. Here, it's probably under 25%. And at many other schools, it's under 50%. As this happens, California had a 30% budget cut, I think, in the recent years. The college presidents are forced to look for additional revenues just to offset the funds which have been withdrawn. So the commercialization of some of the activities surrounding the university include sport. And a few years ago, Bray Carey, who was then creative sports marketing in Charlotte, later ABC vice president, was giving a talk here at the university, and he said they've just put up new satellites with 500 channels, and it's going to go from how do I get my team on television to the producer's question, how do I fill every channel? And so this is the ultimate reality TV. There's no rehearsal. These games happen. People pay to watch them. And so TV makes money, and they share that money, and then it comes to the campus and what happens to it. But the same thing is happening with economic development activities, such as patents. Researchers have the same kind of issues. Who should benefit from the money coming in from university research? Is it the professor? Is it the student graduate assistants, and so forth? So I think, and you mentioned antitrust, and I think that's the legal backdrop under which we see all this happening is also very dynamic. So, I think there's a strong analogy that faculty members and presidents can be drawn to of stipends because honor students get travel stipends and they get other kinds, you see those kinds of typical kinds of things happen. When you get into salaries for students, I think then you're looking at graduate student research. I think you're looking at all other kinds of pay for physical labor around the university. So I think the legalities, antitrust, the design of governance, whether it's NCAA or BCS or whatever, I think the constant reduction of state funds, the growth of reality TV, all of these things make this a very dynamic situation, hard to bring under control, even for the best intended and most collaborative group of people trying to get it under control. It's kind of a very volatile situation. After the last realignment, a political science professor came up to me and he said, "President, I fear that colleges are now acting like nation states, using their friends as they find convenient and acting in their own self-interest." And he leaned over and quoted Thucydides to me. But I think the dynamism, pay for play, what you're interested in, is just one small piece of a very dynamic blurring of the lines between the private sector and education on the one hand and listed companies and television on the other. And it's only one part of the commercialization issue.
Thank you.
I will say that from the last piece of that is, and I'm not well-versed enough to speak about it, but certainly in Congress, the tax, how am I trying to phrase this, the tax status of universities is being examined because of those very same things you're talking about.
As not a for-profit.
Is right, exactly.
And receiving tax considerations as a not-for-profit institution.
That would be a big hit, by the way, if football and men's basketball becomes unrelated business. The UBIT would be a significant hit.
It's interesting, and I think the NCAA they've had a 100-year head start on this conversation, and I think our hope, 10, 20 years from now, hopefully sooner, we'll look back and wonder why we had panel discussions like this, because I think it's obvious that college sports have been given so much lenience in the operations that it's really contrary to what outside of college sports is contrary to what America looks like. If my organization, which is a nonprofit, went out and threw basketball tournaments worth billions of dollars and had TV revenues flowing in, we would be taxed like that. Why do we need hearings in Congress to determine the same thing? And I'm not advocating for taxes I don't want to further tax college athletics, but I'm going to say it like it is. It's just the culture, and this is why I was excited to come here and talk to people, because you guys are the future. Public opinion, it drives everything. It drives laws, it drives courts, and it's important for us to finally get a message out as players. We have 17,000 current and former college athletes in Division I who have signed up behind our mission and goals. So we're the only real independent spokespeople for college athletes. And again, NCAA's had a head start, but taking a step back, why do we have to dance around the issues of amateurism and other things? If college athletes had the same laws of the nation applied to them, there would be no question whether or not they would be paid. It would, by law, they'd have to be paid. They'd be considered employees. Antitrust laws would dictate that schools can't collude and fixed price, artificially cap scholarships. NCAA and its schools would be taxed for the athletic programs as unrelated business taxes.
Workers' compensation.
Workers' compensation. We have a nation of injured athletes right now that have nothing. If they need a knee replacement from an injury they had in college, that's on them. Whereas in the workforce, if the same happened to you in your job, down the line, you're covered forever because of workers' compensation, regardless of where you go. So it's funny that we have to actually talk about this in a panel. But it just, the NCAAs use their money wisely. They have a pretty big propaganda machine, and that creates more work for us.
We have time for 2 more questions. If Orby and Disk, you'll ask them back to back, and then we'll handle them as a panel, and we'll be good.
Just in representing, college athletes in general, what work is being done to help out non-scholarship athletes in the sense of like scouting team? People are putting in the 48 hours, but they're really not getting anything out of it. I'm not sure whether there is any medical care for scouting athletes at all. Scouting athletes, not on scholarship. I just want to know what's being done for them, kind of like guys behind the scene.
That's a great question. And
let
sure.
this go, and then
Oh,
we'll
go
do
ahead.
2 together. Thanks.
All right, my first question is, does the mandatory basketball, the one-year basketball in the NCAA, before you go to the NBA, does that sort of exacerbate or, in fact, create the exploitation that we're talking about, in the sense that now if you want to be a professional basketball player and get paid doing that, then you don't have any other option but to go to a university and not get paid for that? And I can't think of any other job in this country where you have to do your job and not get paid for a year before you actually can work in that job and get paid professionally. And then, in addition to that, if athletes are paid, are you suggesting that labor laws would then kick in and either trump or coincide with NCAA regulations that regulate employment and labor laws in the same way that it works in any other field?
Thanks. No more questions. We'll handle those now. Ramogi, did you want to go with the?
I'll just chime in on all those questions really quickly. Walk-on players contribute a lot. They get a lot of injuries, and what we're advocating for is that they're covered too. That's the biggest thing that they need right now. And I don't know if Mike can explain a little bit about West Virginia, whether or not that includes the walk-ons as well. In terms of the basketball players, absolutely. I mean, why should LeBron James have been forced to go to college? What if he'd have got hurt? What if he had a career-ending injury and never capitalized on that? It's ridiculous, completely unfair. So I don't like either of those rules. And it only affects a small portion of basketball players who have the ability to go straight to the NBA. But good Lord, let them. Let them.
That's not really an NCAA issue. That's an NBA issue. If you're going to represent your university, if you're going to play for West Virginia, then you have to be in school. The NBA has the ability, although they've tried to shift it off on President Emmert, but the NBA has the power to deal with that, and I don't understand why they don't. The NBA is much better off if a kid goes to school for 3 years before then you get a better look at her or him, and they're going to get the same number of kids. It just delays the pool by 3 years. So that's much more of an issue outside the NCAA.
I think as far as the walk-on situation, I mean, again, my son is a walk-on at another school. He is afforded every opportunity, every chance to compete, participate, travel, meals during travel, not scholarship-type meals. He just doesn't receive a scholarship check every year. You know, he is, or we are paying for his tuition, room, and board. So I think that's pretty much across the board. I mean, each coach may, certainly class a walk-on differently than a scholarship player. My son went there obviously knowing his role and how difficult it would be for him to be a regular player as a walk-on. That's given. The only thing that's done a little bit differently here at West Virginia, and that is the fact that we require walk-ons to provide their own primary insurance coverage, where we do not require that of a student athlete, of a scholarship student athlete. And frankly, it just got to a point where the sports that we have heavy walk-ons, which wrestling, for instance, is a sport that we have a heavy number of walk-ons. There's a lot of injuries that occur, and we're paying for injuries for people that may never compete. And that's a unique sport and a unique situation, but we just instituted a policy that says if you're a walk-on, we're going to cover everything that's not covered by your primary insurance coverage. But if you come and you don't have personal insurance, then you cannot be a walk-on. Now, that said, I think it's safe to say that West Virginia University, like a lot of schools, is soon to require all its students to have some sort of insurance before they enroll.
Actually, I forgot to answer the other question about labor laws. Yeah, if players were receiving salaries, all the labor laws would apply. So, and I know there's actually an article about unionization in college sports in the Prospect. Most Division I schools are public schools, and there's actually a lot of states that don't allow public employees to create unions. So I don't think there's ever really going to be a national union for college athletes, regardless of what happens down the line. But labor laws would kick in. And also, too, with the walk-ons, players have a big problem when they go out and they work and sweat and bleed with the same guys on the field, and they run off the training table for their team meal, and the walk-ons are excluded. So that really actually bothers players who have scholarships as well. So that's something we'd like to see change down the line.
That is a difficult thing. We at West Virginia do not have a training table for our basketball team, only our football team. And gymnastics are the only two sports that have it. But that is a situation, and frankly becomes a compliance issue, because now the compliance office has to not only tell the person they can't, but they have to monitor who's eating, who's not eating from that standpoint. So,
lots of walk-ons get money from guys leaving the training table. Let's just put it that way. They get not money, they get food. They get sorry, did I say money? Food. They get food.
I want to thank the Sports Entertainment Law Society, and in particular Rob Wyatt and Matt White, for the excellent work they did in putting this presentation together, and the rest of the S&E crew. And I'm very grateful for Ramogi, Dan, Mike for being here today and giving us a really dynamic look and presentation at what, as President Hardesty mentions, is a really moving, dynamic scenario that's really not going to the flood is coming. So anyway, thank you all very much for being here, and let's thank the panel once again.